What's up, guys? Got another nice and controversial debate for you guys today, and this one is going to be who would win between current Thor and current Superman. So, just for reference, current Thor is not a base Thor, right? And I guess just to clarify, for anybody who doesn't know, like the current continuities for DC, will be using I guess up till the All In special, but it will be like mostly Infinite Frontier feats, and we'll talk about that later. And then for Thor, it's going to be Thor from the new Immortal Thor run. So first off, we'll start with Superman. And so for the current version of Superman, the version of Superman that has Infinite Frontier feats, it's kind of a composite of all of Superman's feats throughout history. That's kind of how this new Infinite Frontier event in DC is supposed to be working. So we're gonna kind of just use any and all available feats for Superman. It's going to be comprehensive. Obviously, we can get a lot of his higher end feats from pre-crisis, but also at the same time, we have a lot of post-crisis feats that are also pretty impressive as well. So we're going to be looking at them kind of as a whole, and I will be referencing the new All-In DC special. So I guess if you haven't read it, then spoiler warning for that. I guess it's like a month old. So for Superman, the first thing that we can have for like a line of scaling to try to get him to like his optimal levels of power is going to be the way he was able to turn the tide of the Dark Crisis event when he was introduced. At first the young heroes were losing, Superman showed up, and then everything was right as day. Obviously, Superman did show up with a few other Justice League members, but he was like clearly and easily the strongest one there and the one who made like the most impactful difference. This Dark Crisis army with that was enslaved by Pariah included the likes of True Form Darkseid. And now it's not exactly easy to say that the form of Darkseid that they would have been fighting here was like literally true form Darkseid max potential, because he was being enslaved and that might have put a hindrance on him. But even the fact that the Great Darkness was able to enslave him is going to be like pretty impressive. And so with that in mind, we might be able to put Superman around that level. And this can kind of also be supported narratively with the idea that we got from Pariah's speech, where he acknowledged that the hope in the DC universe is the most powerful force, implying that it's even stronger than the darkness, which was able to enslave the likes of True Form Darkseid. And also in All In, we got this statement that Superman is kind of like an antithesis to Darkseid. Just like Darkseid represents destruction, Superman represents hope. So, you might even be able to, I guess, sometime later on, after we get more like substantial feats and stuff from All In, Superman may be getting some massive like bumps in recent times, or in new continuity, depending on that. And True Form Darkseid is not to be understated. He is among the most powerful characters we've seen in DC recently. Specifically, he was able to kill the Quintessence, which included the likes of the Spectre, the Phantom Stranger, Highfather, and obviously those characters are pretty peak. Spectre was capable of throwing hands with pre-Crisis Anti-Monitor. Crisis on Infinite Earths Anti-Monitor. So, that's going to be a pretty impressive feat in and of itself, that Darkseid was kind of casually able to destroy them with his Omega Beams. For more lines of scaling for Superman, if we're not enthusiastic about comparing him to True Form Darkseid, we can scale him to the likes of Superboy Prime, albeit he's a little less powerful than Superboy Prime, but he was able to like fight alongside his pre-Crisis self against Superboy Prime. And Superboy Prime, of course, is an incredibly powerful character. In his but his like second appearance, he was capable of shaking and damaging the whole DC multiverse. Later on, we see him fighting the likes of the Darkest Knight, who is a character that's around like low out of reversal in terms of power. He's able of like fighting and eventually killing the likes of Perpetua. In addition to that, Superboy Prime has been shown like regularly slapping around characters that are like considered ridiculously strong in their own right. Mr. McSpittalick being a prime example of that. Aside from that, in Infinite Frontier, we did get a statement from Superman. I know this one's a little hard to interpret, but it kind of goes in line with the way a lot of people do interpret Superman's feats. And that's that he kind of essentially acknowledges that he transcends the concept of strength, speed, etc. And that it doesn't really like have any meaning for him, which, even in like a conservative estimate would make him like a 6D character. And then there's also the feat of him carrying all of existence on his back. So this one I think is probably a bit of a misnomer, and I'm definitely guilty of using this one myself. It's not necessarily going to be like a strength feat per se, because when Atlas gives Superman the multiverse to lift, he does say something to the effect of, like, take it with your heart, not your back, or whatever it is, right? So there might be like this idea that he's like holding like the emotional burden of the multiverse, but not like physically holding it up. Court's out on that. You guys can decide what you want for it. And now in terms of speed, which is going to be, probably the most important, or one of the more impressive things from Superman as well, along with his super strength, of course. Superman is very regularly shown to be comparable to the likes of the Flash, although I think it's pretty much like universally agreed upon. He's not quite Wally West levels of speed, but he is like very capable of keeping his own with Wally West, and then he's like probably faster even than some of the other versions of the Flash, like Jay Garrick rather, and Barry Allen Flash, and Bart Allen as well. So like Superman is pretty fast, and saying that Wally West is maybe like the only character in your verse that like can definitively outspeed you is probably going to be like, that's like a very high bar to set, right? Wally West is maybe even like the most ridiculously fast character that we have in comics, where he is like essentially just like omnipresent. Superman again is like at like an immeasurable level of speed, but not quite on the Wally West level. So it's not really easy to quantify when you get to those immeasurable levels of speed, because we do have Superman literally traveling at infinite speeds across the universe. So it really is just not like super quantifiable. That being said, he's capable of fighting and like keeping. Well, he's capable of not only moving at those high speeds, but also like fighting at those high speeds, which isn't something you can say for most characters. A lot of characters don't necessarily scale in their like movement combat speed to their actual like travel speed. And the way that I've heard that, I guess, summarized is like, who would be faster, Muhammad Ali or Usain Bolt? Like, yes, Usain Bolt would definitely beat Muhammad Ali in a sprint, but like in terms of fighting, Muhammad Ali is not only trained, but like has one of the fastest recorded punches, etc. And now for durability, for most characters, their durability will scale pretty directly to their strength, with a few exceptions, like the characters like maybe the Juggernaut. But for Superman, he's able to fight against characters with like comparable levels of power and like tank attacks on them. Like a super amped Hal Jordan, he's able to tank attacks with. Even like a parallax infused Hal Jordan, he's able to take attacks from, who is like himself like very easily complex multiversal. And then he's able to fight against the likes of Doomsday, who is often thought to be like physically stronger than Superman. And yet Superman is able to not only survive attacks from him, but eventually kill him in most fights they have after Death of Superman. So with that, there's kind of all we have for the main scaling for Superman. And the other thing that's worth acknowledging is going to be his weaknesses. Don't always cover this in every section of these versus debates, but in this one it is slightly important because it does, in my opinion, play a role in the decision, right? Where Superman has, well, obviously his kryptonite weakness and red sun weakness, but that's not really something that's going to be exploitable by most people that aren't like aware of it. So we don't really use those, but he does have a durability weakness to magic. And now the way it's explained doesn't exactly, make sense, right? People say something to the effect of Superman doesn't have invulnerability. He's not like weak to magic. He just doesn't have invulnerability to it, right? And so what you would assume from that is that like, so his Kryptonian invulnerability doesn't apply to magic. He's kind of like a normal person when it comes to taking magic attacks. That makes sense. But then on the other hand, he's capable of fighting and taking attacks from magical beings who are way, way stronger than like a normal person would be able to take an attack from, right? Like, for example, he's fighting against characters like Shazam, fighting against a super like powerful magic infused version of Bizarro, even characters like Solomon Grundy, who, while they are like tiers below Superman, because of his magic, he's able to harm him. But if like the average person is taking a punch from Solomon Grundy, they are gonna die. So I think the way to say it is like Superman's invulnerability is not at its like maximum level when he's taking magic attacks, but at the same time he's not going to die from a magical attack that would kill a normal person, if that makes sense, right? And so I don't think there's ever like a real clear way to really quantify how big Superman's quote unquote weakness to magic is, like just how much less his durability is against it. There really is just like no clear frame of reference we have for something like this. So, court's out on it. Everyone has their own headcanon, but in my mind, it just means that characters who are like a little weaker than him can usually throw hands with him like pretty evenly. So characters like Solomon Grundy, even in my opinion, Captain Marvel and Black Adam, probably scale reasonably below Superman. Might be a controversial take. But I would say that the only reason they're ever able to like really fight against him on even footing is because, well, one, Superman's holding back, and two, Superman does have that weakness to magic. So now we're going to move on to Thor scaling, and remember, we're going to be using Immortal Thor. So like I mentioned before, Immortal Thor is very importantly not base Thor. He does have powers like the Thor Force, and which is essentially the equivalent of the Odin Force, but a little more amped, and like the All Power, which we'll go over a little later. But for Thor, we're going to start with some of his scaling, and maybe even one of the most impressive feats that we have from him is literally from his birth, where his birth was capable of shaking the branches of Yggdrasil. And so Yggdrasil is the world tree in Norse mythology, but the interesting thing about the Yggdrasil in Marvel lore is that it literally like reaches across all of Marvel's like existence. Like every branch like reaches into all the different multiverses. It's like a fully encompassing, I guess, entity. Like it is all of the Marvel multiverse. Omniverse maybe is what they call it now. I'm not 100% sure about that. Right, so we have like constant and many statements that get Yggdrasil to this level. So Superman being able to, Thor being able to shake it as a baby is obviously going to be really impressive. Aside from that, we have some like less impressive showings from Thor, but we'll get to the more insane ones. He is obviously very capable of fighting against characters like Thanos and like fisticuffs. Even without his hammer, he and Thanos are like pretty much equals when it comes to brawling. And if Thanos is on the lower end of your scaling, then you're probably going to go some pretty crazy places. Aside from that, he's able to fight against Jormungandr, who is able to stretch across all of Midgard, which is the mortal realm in Marvel. And his battle with Jormungandr is stated to also be capable of destroying Yggdrasil. Aside from that, we also have fights with Thor against the likes of Arishem, who's one of the named Celestials that we have, and definitely not one of the weaker Celestials too, like maybe a mid to high range Celestial. Usually the ones that are named are more powerful anyway. And you may also notice that some of these feats I'm using are from old Marvel comics, but there's no consistency issue there because Marvel says that everything that happens within its pages is canon, unless it obviously takes place in an alternate universe, so we take all of these feats into account as well. Aside from that, we have yet another, instance of Thor scaling to the World Tree, just to make sure I hammer this home, where he was able to fight against Mythos, which is like an amped version of MODOK, who literally like connected himself to the World Tree and was harnessing all of its power. And Thor, without the All Force or without the All Power or Odin Force, was able to eventually beat this version of MODOK. Aside from that, we also have Thor scaling to yet another outerversal being, that being Null, right? Null, of course, also being capable of fighting against the Celestials, who, again, like, they vary from, like, complex multiversal to outerversal levels of strength, but I think it's generally accepted that Null is on that higher end. He was able to threaten even, like, the entity Eternity, which spans all of the Marvel multiverse as well, so he's often considered an outerversal threat, and Thor was able to fight pretty, like, on hand with him and definitely damage him pretty well, whereas characters like Sentry got, like, absolutely obliterated by Null. So we also have him scaling to the likes of Odin's feats, because the Odin Force is, like, canonically, like, a little weaker than the Thor Force. Current Immortal Thor does upscale Odin. I think that's pretty clear narratively. He is just, like, a more powerful Allfather. And so Odin himself was capable of threatening the whole Marvel multiverse and all of existence in his fight with Seth, the Egyptian god. And one of the more impressive, demonstrations of power that Thor has is his God Blast, which he's able to use when he has either the Odin Force, his Thor Force, the All Power, which is basically just like a super high AP attack, which utilizes all of his force into like one destructive burst. He was able to fight like a heavily amped version of Galactus, and obviously this amped version of Galactus himself also has feats that put him to even like maybe like low outerversal levels of scaling. Aside from that, we also know that Thor's God Blast was capable of holding back the Black Winter, which was literally a event that was threatening to destroy all of the Marvel canon, like all of the realities in existence in the Marvel Universe, making it yet another outerversal threat, which Thor was able to slow down with the power of a God Blast, right? And so similar to Superman in that Infinite Frontier panel I showed you guys, we do have like a similar-ish line from Thor where he's kind of talking about like, who's stronger between him and Hulk, who's faster between him and Quicksilver, etc. And he says that, he's however strong he needs to be. And so I think, from what I get the impression of Immortal Thor, it is like a bit of a deconstruction of the storytelling trope. So take this with a grain of salt. I think this is more so meant to say like, power scaling's a little wacky. You can't have any sort of like specific high or low bar for characters. It depends on how strong they need to be. But if you were to take this literally within lore, it could be similar to that Superman Superman statement where like, Thor isn't necessarily like bound to like conventional limits of strength, speed, etc. He is in that sense like also like, pretty much unlimited strength, unlimited speed, however much he needs to win a fight. So with that all out of the way, I'm going to talk about who I think is going to win. And so obviously, this is one of the more controversial battles that has been plaguing like the comic book community. Although this one's a little more specific. This one's Immortal Thor versus current Superman. So not quite the same base Thor, base Superman debate that goes around. And for this, I do have to give it pretty handedly to Thor. And a big part of that, of course, is because Immortal Thor is super ridiculously amped, right? He has the power, or the all power in the Thor Force, which upscales from past versions as well, because we know that Thor is more powerful now than he's ever been. That being said, Thor was, even before his current continuity, like a definitively outer-versal character. He's shown many, many times again being able to affect Yggdrasil. He's shown many times being able to fight against outer-versal level beings like Null, the Celestials, etc. Even Mythos, again, with the World Tree infused, is going to be an outer-versal level character. Whereas with Superman, I do think that in order to get him to outer-versal, we do need to stretch a little more than, what we have, like, definitive. We don't have quite enough feats for me to comfortably say Superman is, like, an outer-versal level being. Like, at most, I would say a complex multiversal, maybe hyper-versal, but not necessarily outer-versal. Unless you really want to also, like, add on the feats about the Source Wall, but that's neither here nor there. I think that those feats can be a little hard to scale. So for Superman, I do think in the future we may have, I guess, feats that can put him maybe even at the level of True Form Darkseid. But until that day comes, right now I can't in good conscience say he even scales to like Superboy Prime's highest feats. Like if you ask any like half knowledgeable comic book community member who would win between Superboy Prime and Superman, obviously Prime is cleaning Superman's clock 9 times out of 10. That being said, one argument that people will have for a debate like this is that Superman's speed is way higher than Thor's, at least in terms of feats. And so this is hard to, I guess, argue against because, like, what exactly is speed once we get past these immeasurable levels? I guess narratively, Wally West is probably faster than Superman, but, like, it's not really easy to say that Superman or Thor should be, like, faster than the other in terms of, like, combat speed or even movement speed in general. But that being said, you can even, I guess, if you want to, in your headcanon, say Superman is faster than Thor, that's fine, because maybe Superman does use his speed more in combat than we see Thor anyway. But at the same time, just because you're faster than a character doesn't mean you're going to be dodging every single attack they throw, especially if the character is comparable in speed, right? Like with the Flash, argument's a little different. He does deliberately dodge every attack that he can, but Superman has literally fought against the likes of characters who are way, way slower than him and still been able to get like caught by their attacks. So that's really like the only bar. Like it's hard to say that Superman would literally be able to avoid every single attack from Thor. Superman's literally been capable of being tagged by characters like Solomon Grundy, who was like a Batman level villain, and even like the Banshee, whose attacks obviously travel at the speed of sound, which Superman really should be able to dodge, but he never does when he's fighting against her. So with all that out of the way, I will have to give the fight win to Thor, but I am also interested to hear what you guys think. Do you think maybe I will say, like, you can even scale Superman to outer-versal levels of power, and even if you think he's comparable in strength to the likes of Thor, that magic durability weakness is going to be something that plays in hand, especially, I think, with characters who are, like, comparable to Superman. That's when it really kicks in, right? Because then, maybe they're going, like, blow for blow, and it looks pretty even, but then eventually Superman's going to lose out because he's literally just not as durable against the magic-based attack as he would against, like, a normal attack, right? So, sorry, just want to make sure I got that one in too. But yeah, if you guys have disagreements, and I know you guys will, please feel free to drop comments. I'm very happy to hear what you guys have to say. Also, consider joining our Discord, looking to grow that community. hopefully we can, all get together in there, have some nice hearty debates, maybe get on some calls and do some debates as well. Really just talk about scaling and build that community that way. So if you guys are interested, the link should be in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next one.